Well, welcome to is this 4, Ian?
We did the pregame show, so yeah, this will be, I guess, our fourth week of it, but we're leading into week 3 of the regular season.
Well, I call it week 4 of the WPIAL BLITZ show. I'm Bruce Badgley, Ian McMeans, and Ian, why don't you introduce our very special guest that we got with us today?
Yeah, we have head coach Rick Kolesar from the Laurel Highlands Mustangs. They thumped Brownsville this past week. That was not only their biggest victory in school history, but also their first 3-0 start in school history in, I'll say, games that were played. They started 3-0 back in 1976, but their third win was a forfeit by Brownsville. So this is the first time they've actually won their first 3 games of the season on the field. So congratulations, coach, on really the first 3-0 start in school history.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been an exciting start to the season so far.
What would you attribute, the how you've gained the momentum this season so far?
I think last year we were really young. We had a lot of new kids on the team, first-year high school football players. So it was a lot of learning process last year, but we returned a lot of starters. The kids were hungry all off season. So this has kind of been building, from January on, building to having this good start to the season.
And it doesn't hurt having Rodney Gallagher, who was actually our week 0 player of the week, just lighten it up for you this year either.
Yeah, he's a special talent. He leads the guys around him. They see him doing special things. They want to, do the best they can to help support. But he's really a special talent.
Yeah, he's been just super fun to watch. I've been on the record a few times on this show saying that he is, one of probably the 2 or 3 players in the WPIAL that's the most fun to watch with the ball in his hands, just because of everything he can do, along with Devin Whitlock, who, you guys will see later in conference play. So that leads me into my first question is, you're off to a great 3-0 start, build a lot of momentum, and but some other teams in your conference have been playing well too. So how do you carry this, into the conference schedule that's coming up here?
Yeah, through the first 3 weeks, I think our conference went 14-5 or something. We have a bunch of undefeated teams. We play in what I consider to be one of the deepest conferences in the whole WPIAL. So, it was a good start to the non-conference, but, we go into Ringgold this week, and they're going to be a test for us. It's going to be a tough game, but I think we just need to continue to build every week, get a little bit better, and see where we fall at the end of the year.
I talked a little bit about gaining the momentum. How do you maintain this momentum? How do you keep everybody level headed that, you're just trying to go 1-0 each week?
Every Friday night we kind of talk about, enjoy it tonight, celebrate, have fun, back to work the next morning. And we come in on Saturday, we review the film from the night before, and we say, okay, we're on to the next week. Let's worry about winning this Friday. And we strictly focus on the team that's coming that week, and that's where our mental preparation is.
Go ahead, Ian.
Sure. So have you guys felt, been able to feel the support of the community over the last, 18, 20 months with everything that's happened, and you couldn't have fans at games. Now fans can be back at games. So have you kind of been able to feel the continued support of the community for the team?
Oh, absolutely. Last year when, there were limited tickets to games, it was everybody wanted a ticket. You had a lot of people that wanted to get out to see. And then throughout the off season, everyone talking, they hope they can get out to games, hope they can get to games. You've seen our student section travel. It's been terrific. The first couple of weeks, we've been on the road every week. So we've had a lot of support in the community, and I know they're excited. In 2 weeks, we get that first home game where it's going to be a packed house.
Just on a personal level, and I've been asking this. I've been fortunate enough to be able to, talk to coaches all around the state: District 3, District 1, District 12, WPIAL. Talk about how difficult it is to have a work-life balance as, a high school football coach.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, being a teacher, you're engulfed in it all day in school. You're always trying to recruit a kid or hear about a kid that's not in class, checking grades. And then you go to practice and you get home late and you want to watch film, but you want to spend time with family and be with everybody. My wife's been great though. She's at the games every Friday. She takes pictures. She runs our social media account. So she's a big part in helping support. I don't think you can do it if you don't have support at home. You can't be a high school coach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this is your third year as Laurel Highlands head coach, if I'm reading the stats correctly here.
Yep.
So some of this, was before your time, but Laurel Highlands hasn't made the playoffs since the move to the 6 classification era. So before that, they'd made it in actually 9 of 14 years between 2002 and 2015. But with your start this season and, with some of the other teams in your conference that you've beaten or had really close games against, you've had fantastic games against Trinity the last couple of years. What would it mean to you to make the playoffs this year?
Yeah, that was a big goal coming in. We wanted to be a playoff team this year. And I think we talked about, the depth of our conference and the quality at the top. I think, everyone considers the top three of the best teams in 4A. So I think if we do what we need to do and we earn our way into the playoffs, we're going to have a chance to win that first playoff game in school history. And, that's kind of where our mindset is let's win one week at a time. Let's get ourselves, to the dance, so to speak. And then once we're in there, let's go win one.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be really cool to see.
What are some of the keys, for you to, each week to go 1-0? What's your identity as a football team to be successful?
I think offensively, we say we want to score every possession. We try to not turn the ball over. We try to not have early penalties on series and get behind the sticks. If we do those two things, typically our drive ends with points. Defensively, it's just not missing tackles, playing assignment football, making teams drive the length of the field, no big plays, continue to make tackles, and then create turnovers when the opportunity arises. It's about consistency and being consistent and being solid every single play.
Sounds like a coach to me, Ian.
Most definitely. Yeah. So thanks a lot for joining us, Coach. And we really appreciate it. You taking the time out of your night and out of your week to talk with us, and best of luck the rest of the season.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Coach, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed meeting you, sir. Take care. Best of luck.
See you. Thank you.
All right. All right. The one thing about the great thing about these guests that we've always had, Ian, is they haven't had a problem ever like getting out of the show. I don't know if that's a message or whatever like that, but it's always a kind of a smooth exit there. But as you talked about, wow, the first time 3-0 in school history, I can't even imagine the level of excitement that's going on there right now.
Oh, it's got to be. And Laurel Highlands is a program. I mean, from their first season, I think 1966 was their first year that they played WPIAL football. But they haven't been a super successful program. I think their total program winning percentage is somewhere around like 350. So not a historically successful program. But they, like I said, they did find ways, it seemed like, to, kind of make the playoffs every year, or, more or less, they made it 9 out of 14 years from 2002 to 2015 before the state moved to 6 classifications, which, was pretty successful for their program.
Successful.
Was just making the playoffs, but like Coach Kolesar alluded to, they've never won a playoff game in school history. They're 0-10 in the playoffs as a school. So not only getting to the playoffs for the first time in, it would be 6 years now, because we're this is our 6th year into the 6 classification era, but winning that first playoff game in school history would be a tremendous accomplishment. So, they've accomplished a lot already. They got, the biggest win in school history. They got the first 3-0 start in school history. So they're moving on the right direction.
We got the first Brute Athletic Player of the Week in school history. I mean, but no, I mean, I tell you what, so many times, you've been able to, pull these programs out and, highlight them. That's really what, we do. The idea is promoting the game. It's easy to promote the top level programs. It's really difficult to really find the true feel good stories. And, I commend you. I mean, each and every week, each and every year, or, this is our 2nd year here, but finding these stories that, of these programs that have been down and out, that now are on the way back, or just, on the way. is really interesting to me. And so I guess I think you've got control. You know, as I was looking through I can't believe how much color these people are going to see tonight. So hopefully,
There's there's
I
a
mean,
lot of
you definitely, I think, are putting these presentations next to like maybe a box of Crayola crayons and trying to go through all of them. I mean, during this
so
program, but that's okay.
I'll say this. I'm very meticulous about things, so it's actually all color coded together.
I
And I'll
know.
explain it as we go. So once again, thanks everyone for tuning into the show. This is how to find us. If you're watching us on YouTube, you've already found us. But you can follow us on Twitter at WPIAL_Blitz and Badgley Bruce, and check out articles on SteelCityBlitz.com. We've got WPIAL games of the week, WPIAL standings, and as we get closer to the playoffs, we'll have some playoff scenario discussions as well. And our rarely used Instagram account, which I really should post to more, is
Yeah.
WPIAL_Blitz. So you can follow that as well.
Yeah, we want to thank our sponsors there too.
Yes.
Get Recruited Consulting and Brute Athletic, who sponsors our Player of the Week award, which is upcoming.
Yes, it is.
Unless I've missed it.
No, you didn't miss it this time. We're good. It is upcoming. So first off, we're going to talk about the biggest win of the week was Central Valley against Aliquippa. Aliquippa's head coach, Mike Warfield, was a former assistant at Central Valley, and since taking the Aliquippa job, I think he's only beat them once. But they played in 3A together for a number of years. Met in a WPIAL championship game a few years ago, and they've played a lot of close games over the years. Like I remember a 14-8 game one year, and this one was 21-12. I think the WPIAL championship they played was I think it was 14-13 in overtime or something like that. So a lot of close matchups between these two nearby school districts that there's a lot of rivalry there, even though Central Valley's only been around for a few years. So congrats to Central Valley on continuing their winning streak against Aliquippa. The game of the week, Chartiers Valley beat Keystone Oaks in overtime. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but just a great back and forth battle all game between the two of them. And actually two of my best friends from college, one of them went to Char Valley and one went to KO. So I was texting with them during the game, so I saw the scores going back and forth to try and get some trash talk going between them. So it's kind of fun, for those of us that are long gone from high school, even to watch our alma maters and then have our friends tease each other about how their alma maters are doing. So congrats to Char Valley on the big win. Both of those are pretty good programs. Really impressive game. Both quarterbacks had really good games in that one. The upset of the week, Seton LaSalle, a 2A program which had been kind of down in the dumps a little bit, kind of finished towards the bottom of the conference the last couple of years, went out and upset South Park, who was a 3A program that I had some high hopes for. They made the playoffs last year, narrowly lost to Keystone Oaks in the quarterfinals, returned some starters, and now they're off to an 0-2 start. So big win for Seton LaSalle's program, though, that went through some turmoil this offseason. Their head coach and one of their assistant coaches actually got banned for the year for recruiting allegations. So big win for Seton LaSalle. Congrats to their program. And we'll talk a little bit more about South Park later. Couple other noteworthy results. Central Catholic beating Pine Richland. Pine Richland off to an 0-3 start now. We talked about them last week when we had the confidence meter, and we said it wasn't quite time to panic yet. And I'd still agree it's not quite time to panic. But once again, another blown second half lead for Pine Richland. They were ahead in that game, and Central Catholic stormed back to beat them. But, you can't really hang your head about losing to, one of the best 6A team in the WPIAL when you're a 5A program. So,
nobody jumping out of windows yet.
No, I mean, they shouldn't be. It's not a devastating loss for them, but an 0-3 start after after pretty much firing the whole coaching staff. It's they might be getting close, I'll say, but they shouldn't be, but they might be.
Well, look, as you mentioned a number of times that their postseason relies on their conference, and they're still heavily favored to win that conference. So it's not like they're in danger of like November is like over with or that. I mean, It is what it is. But look, they've got a second chance, and hopefully they'll regroup. And look, Pennsylvania football is a better place with Pine Richland, being a top performer. So let's hope that they rebound.
Yeah, and really 5A is kind of wide open this year now because coming into it we had thought
wide open in the WPIAL, let's say.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I mean Governor Mifflin's playing really well. It's not, but nevertheless, that we thought Gateway was a top team, but Gateway went out and lost to Thomas Jefferson, who's a 4A program, and it was a close game. It was a narrow game. Anytime you get the top 4A program against the top 5A program, it's a good matchup. But nevertheless, Gateway lost. Penn Trafford, who was kind of right there with Gateway, we thought lost to Bell Vernon, who's another top 4A program. And then Woodland Hills, who's also, a really good 5A program in that same conference with Gateway and Penn Trafford, lost to Moon. I was
surprised at that. Were you?
Yeah, a little bit. Woodland Hills' star quarterback got hurt about halfway through the game, so that made a bit of a difference. But Moon's been just solid all year. They've got some really good players there. That was a good result for them, and they're off to a 3-0 start. I think Upper St. Clair's still a team to be reckoned with, and you can't sleep on Pine Richland either. So 5A is really wide open right now. With a lot of good teams. But one thing I did want to talk about, speaking of 5A, is this is a new thing. Last week we did the confidence meter. This week we've got the burning question. So is 4A better than 5A? And these the numbers here, the rankings are based on the Trib Live High School Sports Network rankings. But the number one team in 4A has beaten two teams that made the 5A playoffs last year in Gateway and South Fayette, and Bell Vernon, the number two team in 4A, beat Penn Trafford, who took over the number one spot in 5A. So you've got a couple of the top 4A teams that have beaten a couple of the top 5A teams, and maybe top to bottom, 5A is still better than 4A, but I think it begs the question, like, could Thomas Jefferson or Bell Vernon win 5A this year? And I think they, like, Thomas Jefferson, Aliquippa, Bell Vernon are the top 4A teams, probably the top ones in the state. But could they win the WPIAL in 5A? They might be able to. Like, they're good enough to do that. The top three in 4A are really, really good this year.
So well, obviously, it's fantasy football when you're talking about this. So you think Thomas Jefferson could beat Pine Richland this year?
They might be. I mean, I would love to see that game. They might be able to. And honestly, we'll see the next couple weeks, because so far Pine Richland has played 3 6A teams, so we haven't really got a good barometer for
I agree. Correct. I mean, sometimes, and it was funny because I was just talking about that. I did my pre-snap look, the District 12, District 1 show a little earlier tonight, and I talked about how, at least in my mind, that it's enormously difficult leapfrogging classifications. I mean, that's the reason why they're there. I mean, the numbers, just the physicality, okay, of players that you get having bigger numbers and what have you by going up against a higher classification. I think it's more, I'll be honest with you, I think it's more pronounced in the lower classifications, like going from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. But I think it is a lot closer between 4 and 5 and a 5 and 6. Almost the line is blurred, I think, anymore between 5 and 6. Numbers and that. I think it's, quite honestly, I think that there's an argument to, like, go back to 4 classifications, because those teams are so much closer than they ever were.
Yeah.
Now that may be different for how you would do the other classifications, but
yeah. Well, and remember too that, of 5A, half of them would have been in Quad A and half of them would have been in AAA back in the day. So,
right.
we may have actually seen some of these teams match up with each other too. you know, and speaking of Pine Richland, that their next 2 games are against 2 of the better 5A teams. They play Upper St. Clair and Gateway the next 2 weeks. So that's really the measuring stick for them for how do they match up with the rest of the 5A crowd, I will say. And the other thing I'll say is that, you know, when the PIAA went to the 6 classification model, one of the things they discussed, I believe, was, I think they called it a Super 700 model, where, you know, schools with 700 kids or above would go in a separate top classification, and then they would go either with 4 or 5 for the rest of them. So it would just take out kind of those really huge schools, and then all the rest of them could still kind of compete. I think it was 5 total classes, that there were 4 plus that kind of Super 700 class, which the more I think about it, actually might not have been a bad idea. That 5 classes probably would have split teams up pretty evenly, rather than, I still feel like 6 is too tiered. It's too split up. You know, you have districts around the state where you either have no one in a class, or you have like 1 or 2 teams in a class, and it's just, you know, those teams, I guess, automatically like make the state playoffs, and it's so hard to find scheduling for them and all that, you know,
clearly.
Yeah. I'm still personally a fan of 4.
Not,
but
look,
I think 5 was probably the right number.
There's debate on, you know, on that. Look, it's we're not going back.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag at this point. We're not going back.
We're the toothpaste out of the tube, the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
We're not going back. So, you know, tweaking it, I don't know. I mean, if they were going to tweak it, they would have done it already. I mean, with you know, all of the 2-year schedule set for the next, you know, thing there. I mean, there's nothing happening for, I don't know, 3-4 more years.
Yeah, the one tweak they made the last time was with the success formula and teams moving up. And I saw today, Bob Greenberg out of District 10 tweeted that you know, they're considering allowing teams to move down if they don't accumulate any success points, which I don't really like that either, because to get a success point, you have to at least reach the round of 16 in the state playoffs, which for the WPIAL standpoint would be the, other than 6A, it'd be either the 6A championship game or the WPIAL semifinals for every other class. And there have been some pretty good teams out there that just like haven't made the semifinals in 2 years.
That's and you know, that's for conferences. Okay. You know what I'm saying? It's like conferences have the ability to micromanage that. Okay. That if you have a 5A team who has been just historically bad, okay, well, you know, crank them down. All right. And, you know, they'll get some success points because they're, you know, playing, you know, some of the smaller classification teams. I mean, you know, it isn't going to help them, you know, possibly getting, you know, into the state playoffs, but I don't know. I think you should leave that up to the conferences. It's not up to the PIAA to figure that out.
And last cycle, when the WPIAL did kind of realign all the schedules, they had surveyed all the schools and asked them if they would like to have conferences with mixed classification teams. And the resounding answer was no, that schools wanted to play just in conferences with their you know, with teams from their classification.
Well,
so that's still why the WPIAL set up the way it is.
All I can say is that the Lancaster-Lebanon League, this last go round, I mean, they had 5A teams in Section 3, and you know, just to do just that, to try and, you know, create competitive balance. You know, not to have, you know, the programs that were, you know, not historically good, they just moved them down. So it allowed for competitive balance based on historical rather than, you know, numerical. And you know, and that's really what it needs to do.
Yeah, and I think that was something the WPIAL tried to do this cycle with their non-conference scheduling. Was, you know, we'll see that as we talk a little more tonight, that some of the teams that had been historically not as successful, they tried to schedule games against lower classifications, which didn't help them make the playoffs, because playoffs are just based on conference games, but it still, you know, maybe helped them win a few games. So right now,
helped in the beauty contest.
Yes, we will move to our Brute Athletic Player of the Week, which is Jamar Pearson, running back and linebacker.
I can't possibly miss this slide.
Yes. So just Stowe Rocks was, one of the favorites in 2A this year. They played a McGuffey team that was ranked in the top 5 coming into the season, lost that week 0 game to Southmoreland, which was kind of an upset. And they, but McGuffey was still one of the favorites in the Century Conference, really good team. And Stowe Rocks put a stomping on. I mean, you look at the final score, you see it's 36-0. You're like, okay, Stowe Rocks beat the crap out of them. But I went to the game actually, and Stowe Rocks' passing attack, which had been, highly vaunted. They've got a really good quarterback in Austin Jones. They got 3 really good receivers that they just couldn't get clicking against McGuffey. And it was really Jamar Pearson that turned the game around. And this is why he's the player of the week this week, because, his play really turned things around. That Stowe Rocks' offense, they had 2 turnovers the first 2 drives, threw an interception and fumbled the ball. And, they weren't clicking until they started giving him the ball, and then he routed off some yards, got a couple first downs, and then the Stowe Rocks scored a touchdown to go up 8-0. And then McGuffey drove it all the way down to the goal line. Stowe Rocks got a goal line stop. And then on the first play from scrimmage, they just handed off to Jamar Pearson, and just a simple run up the middle, and then breaks a couple tackles, boom to the outside, breaks another tackle, gets a block from his receiver, and goes 98 yards all the way to the house. And it's a game-changing play in a premier matchup in 2A between 2 playoff teams last year. And then here's another this was a 75-yard touchdown run in the second half. Once again, making guys miss, getting to the sideline, and using his speed to go all the way to the house. So a fantastic game that he really took over. And so congratulations to Jamar Pearson from Stowe Rocks, our Brute Athletic Week 2 Player of the Week. Wound up with 263 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Fantastic. Thanks to Brute.
Yes. And so some of our other top performers, I mentioned that Chartiers Valley had a great performance. Anthony Mackey, their quarterback, threw for 284 yards and 5 touchdowns, and incredibly, almost all of that went to Abe Ibrahim, who had 229 yards and 4 touchdowns as a receiver, including the game winner in overtime.
I don't think I've ever seen that much to just one guy.
Yeah.
I mean, a high, like you said, 284 and 229 to one guy.
Yeah, and 4 touchdowns for a receiver in one game. It's incredible. So I'll say it was a very tough decision this week for our player of the week. So, I mean, Jamar Pearson deserved it. He took over that game. But I almost gave it to the tandem of Mackey and Ibrahim, because they were just really, really good in that overtime victory over Keystone Oaks for Char Valley. Landon Alexander from Central Valley, 230 and 2 touchdowns in their big rivalry win over Aliquippa. The big news there too was Central Valley's quarterback Matt Merritt suffered an ankle injury, so he had to leave partway through the game. Thankfully, no break to his ankle, that just a sprain, so he will be able to get back at some point this season. But Alexander took over the game and delivered the win for Central Valley. Hayden Teska from Greensburg Salem, another 5 touchdown performance overall, 4 passing, 1 rushing. Great job by him. And then Sean Curley from Carlinton on a Saturday afternoon special. They came from behind to beat Riverview, ran for 256 and 4 touchdowns. So a lot of big performances this week around the WPIAL. And congratulations to Jay Pearson on winning the Player of the Week award.
Yeah, congratulations to all those guys.
Yes. So the biggest news this week on our Streak Watch is that Uniontown, which is playing as an independent, won a game.
How about that?
Yeah, they ended their 35-game losing streak. Uniontown had opted out of playing in the WPIAL last season. Actually only played 2 games last year, because they had initially decided not to play at all, and then decided to play a little bit but be an independent. So they played just 2 games last year.
And then they bagged it.
They beat Carrick, Pittsburgh City League school. So congratulations to Uniontown for getting off the schneid and winning their first game in a number of years. 35 games in high school football is a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah,
we have a similar story like out here in District 3 where Kutztown was, I mean, I was sitting there, and I'm going to have a gentleman on who's got a little history on this on my Fresh Set of Down show, but they're actually 2-1, and I'm like, incredible. You thought that they're going to fool the program, and then you'd be surprised where 1 to 2 wins are going to take teams, right?
Yeah. So yeah, Uniontown's last win was actually week 7 of 2016
Oh
against
my
Laurel
God.
Highlands. So
Oh my God.
yeah. So if you think about that, the kids that are seniors now were 8th graders the
And what
last time they won a
classification
game.
is Uniontown?
They were 4A because they would have been in a conference with Thomas Jefferson and stuff. And actually part of the reason they decided to play as an independent was they were a 3A school the last 2 years, and their enrollment bumped them up to 4A, and they hadn't won a game since 2016. So they obviously didn't win a game the last 2 years. And they were like, we went 0-20 in 2 years in 3A, and now you expect us to move up to 4A and play in a conference with Thomas Jefferson and Bell Vernon and
Yeah,
McKeesport now.
right.
Like, they opted to play as an independent.
I mean, right.
Yeah.
Just slit my wrists now. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. So, and actually, Uniontown down there in Fayette County, neighboring school district of Albert Gallatin, neighboring school district of Laurel Highlands, Albert
I know it
Gallatin.
well. I used to spend
Yeah.
a lot of time in Uniontown.
Yeah, Albert Gallatin had opted a few years ago to play as an independent because they were in a similar situation where they were, a 5A size school, but only winning 1 or 2 games a year. And they kind of bounce back and forth between 4A and 5A, but nevertheless, they decided to play as an independent, and all of a sudden, they start scheduling some teams from Maryland, some other teams that hadn't been as good. And then they won a couple games, and now more kids are turning out for the program because they've won a few games now. And Albert Gallatin's kind of starting to turn things around a little bit. So Uniontown kind of followed the same path of going the independent route. One other note, we already talked about Laurel Highlands off to their first 3-0 start in school history. But Knock played Deer Lakes this past week, and Knock had a 10-game losing streak, and Deer Lakes had a 14-game losing streak. So one of them had to snap, and it was Knock winning 21-13 and ending their 10-game losing streak. So the longest losing streak now in the WPIAL is Ambridge at 26 games since Uniontown won a game. And actually, a few weeks ago, we saw Northgate win a game too. So Ambridge now has the longest losing streak. Central Valley is holding on to the longest winning streak. And Union is the only one that dropped off that winning streak number. So we'll see how those go as we start to move into conference play here.
Right. Yeah, thanks to Get Recruited. Andrew Cohen takes a personal approach. I do know that I believe that Get Recruited Consulting is going to have a camp out in the WPIAL area this spring. So check it out at getrecruitedconsulting.com. If you have any questions, is there any recruiting service that's giving you their phone number to give them a call? I don't know. I mean, it's like, hey, fill out a profile, or drop me some film or whatever like that. No. Andrew says, give me a call. Let's talk. And I think that most families and most players, you want to talk to a live person to find out what's going on with your recruiting. Okay. That's the personal approach. That's Andrew Cohen and getrecruitedconsulting.com. Give him a call. He'll be glad to talk to you about what he's all about and whether it's a good fit for you. And that's really what he's going to be. He's going to be honest and upfront. And we really appreciate Andrew supporting this program. And, I got to know him this off season. I personally like the way that he runs his camps, personally like the way of how he's connecting kids to schools and matching the kids to the schools, which is enormously beneficial. So just give Andrew a call, 570-428-2872.
Yes, thank you. We really appreciate Andrew's support for our show, like you said. So now, as I mentioned, we are moving into conference play. So how the WPIAL has set this up that now we're moving into week 3 is that for schools that have a conference of 7 teams or 8 teams, they will begin conference play this week. And then schools that are in conferences of just 6 teams will have non-conference play for the next 2 weeks, games being scheduled by the WPIAL until we get to week 5 when every team will have conference play. Yes.
It still boggles my mind that the district are scheduling games for the teams. That just doesn't happen anywhere else. Okay. I mean, the district wants no business. They was just stays out of everybody's business. So that's
Yeah.
why I like this show. I learned so much. I'm going it's like it's a league unto itself. That's for sure.
It is. It has a certainly a unique way of operating, and I think part of it was that, probably back in the early to mid 2000s, when teams were able to schedule their own games, a lot of teams weren't able to find games because they had to go out, or and the WPIAL kind of just said, all right, we want to make sure that every team gets 9 games on their schedule. So we're going to take control of the both conference and non-conference scheduling to make sure that everybody has a game on the schedule every week. And that was kind of how it started, and it stuck with it. And actually, I've been a critic of the WPIAL scheduling over the years, but this cycle's schedule has probably been the most balanced that they've had yet in a long time. So credit to them for really putting some thought into the schedule for this cycle. Obviously, we didn't see its full scheduling capacity last year because of the shortened season, but this year it's been good. We've had a lot of competitive games, and like I mentioned, teams that hadn't been as historically successful, they tried to match up against teams from lower classifications, teams that moved down in classifications. They tried to keep some historical rivalry games from their higher classification on the schedule for the early weeks. So it's been good overall. So just to run through, what conferences are starting play is the 6A classification has 8 teams. 5 of them will make the playoffs, and they're starting conference play this week. 2 out of the 3 conferences in both 4A and 3A will start. And the Century Conference and Midwestern Conference in 2A will start, along with all 3 1A conferences will start conference play this week. So this is just a good reminder of not only how many teams make the playoffs, but who is in conference play and who is still playing non-conference opponents for the next 2 weeks. So let's take a look at some of these conferences and how they've started. So as we've said before, only conference games matter for qualifying for the playoffs. That being said, so the standings aren't really the standings because it doesn't matter how you
it doesn't
started.
It doesn't matter.
But I did just kind of order them based on their records so far. So based on my very, very rough color coding that you've come to notice, purple is 6A, green is 5A, blue is 4A. So you see green on here. That means, Mount Lebanon has played 3 games against 5A opponents and won them all. Central Catholic played a game against a D12 team in Imhotep Charter, and then 2 games against WPIAL 5A opponents. North Allegheny hasn't played a single team from the WPIAL yet. Hempfield off to a 2-1 start, but both of their wins were over 4A opponents, and they lost their only game against the 5A opponents. So, how does that stack up once they get into 6A play? So I still feel pretty confident in my preseason outlooks on these teams that Mount Lebanon, Central Catholic, North Allegheny are probably the top 3. And remember, 5 of these teams make the playoffs. So Seneca Valley, Canon-Mac are probably the top contenders. Hempfield and Norwin, I'm not as sold on. The other thing to look for here is, how do teams fare against common opponents, right? So you had Mount Lebanon beat Bethel Park 28-0, and Baldwin lost to Bethel Park 35-0. So pretty big divide between those 2 teams. Mount Lebanon beat Upper St. Clair 36-13. Bethel Park lost to Upper St. Clair 48-14. So once again, pretty big divide there between the opponents. So since these teams haven't played each other, just looking as we get into conference play at those common opponents can give you some sense for how the teams potentially stack up against each other. 5A, as we said, none of the conferences are moving into conference play, so we'll move down to 4A. The Big 8 conference, we interviewed Coach Kolesar from Laurel Highlands after that 3-0 start, but let's not forget, so their 3-0 start was a win over Connellsville, who in green is in 5A. The orange ones are 3A opponents. So they've beaten 2 teams that are in a lower classification than they are, and also beat Connellsville, who's in a higher classification. So pretty good start for Laurel Highlands. McKeesport, I'd say, has a slightly better start, and really good starts for Thomas Jefferson and Bell Vernon, beating some of the top 5A teams, which is why I still have them labeled as championship contenders. But remember, 4 out of these 7 teams are going to make the playoffs, so you only have to win a couple games to finish in that top 4. But I still feel like TJ, Bell Vernon, and McKeesport are kind of the top three here. And then the fourth spot is kind of wide open, as Coach Kolesar alluded to, that between Ringgold, Trinity, West Mifflin, and Laurel Highlands, any one of those teams could get it. So it's going to be a fun race to watch. In the Greater Allegheny Conference, which has been kind of crazy over the years and still living up to that.
Kind of crazy with color coding too, if you ask me. But
so once again, the purple is 6A, green is 5A, blue is 4A, the orange is 3A, and the yellow is a 2A opponent. So adding some of those in as well, but just kind of helps you see, the quality of opponents people have played, right? That Hampton has played 2 5A teams along with a 3A team, whereas, say Armstrong is 2-1, but both of their wins were over 3A opponents, and then their one loss was against a 4A opponent. So a little harder to kind of judge where Armstrong is versus Hampton that, you probably feel pretty confident in. But then, a team like Plum that won the conference last year and reached the semifinals and nearly beat Thomas Jefferson, they're 0-3, but all 3 of their losses were to 5A opponents. So, kind of that question of don't sleep on Plum yet, because all of their losses were to teams in higher classes. So,
but I get that they got clocked a little bit there too. So it's not like, they were competitive, but I think the team out of all of these that I think, and I talked about it in our preview show, that I think is, maybe may come back out of the pack this year will be Indiana, but it is what it is.
Yeah, we'll see. In Indiana, this was an interesting conference because when it got put together last year, merging some teams together that had moved down from 5A, some teams that had been in 4A, the only one that had made a playoff appearance in the 6 classification era had been Mars. So none of the other ones had made the playoffs, in the last 5 years. And then Mars and Plum made it last year, and Hampton made it last year too. So but now this year you've got 5 of these teams that are going to make the playoffs. So it's still, it's 5 out of 8 teams are going to make the playoffs. So it's a wide open race moving forward here. Moving down to 3A, North Catholic. Now this is another conference that, right, I know I said a lot in the beginning that it was a numbers game. Oh, actually I got something wrong here. Sorry. East Allegheny and Freeport are actually both 1-2. So, the red being the 2 losses and the 1 win. So they're actually both 1-2, not 2-1. My bad there. But nevertheless, four of these teams are going to make the playoffs. So even if you figure North Catholic at 3-0, East Allegheny and Freeport both at 1-2. So one of these teams that started 0-3 is going to come back and make the playoffs this year. So, when we talk about, the playoffs is a numbers game for some teams. Yeah, it's you're only going to have to beat, 2. You're
only going to have to win 3 games to make the postseason.
Yeah. Someone's potentially going to win 3 games here, 2 or 3 games maybe, and potentially make the playoffs. So, and a lot of these games were, against higher classification. So Mount Pleasant played 2 of them. That's a fellow 3A team. Indiana, Highlands, both 4A programs, and we're talking about 3A. So those are losses to higher classification.
Hey, I remember one year Steel High, they got to the Final Four in 1A, coming out of a 3-7 regular season mark. So yeah, it depends on who you play.
Yep. And then also we have our first light pink one, which is a little hard to distinguish from the orange, but these are 1A programs. So Jeanette and Springdale are 1A programs here. So, if you're looking and saying, well, which ones might not be as bad, you've got Derry and Burrell that have lost more games to higher classification teams, where Deer Lakes lost to a 1A school in Springdale and Valley lost to a 2A school in Shadyside. So, but we'll see. Like I said, it's a numbers game here. 4 of the teams are going to make the playoffs, and North Catholic looks like the best team so far, and East Allegheny and Freeport look like strong contenders. They both made the playoffs last year, but pick one for who the 4th one is. We'll see what happens. But that's kind of the exciting thing about how the schedule worked out, that a lot of teams are going to be in it as we move on through. In the Interstate Conference, same kind of thing. You've got, 4 out of these teams are going to make the playoffs. You've got Mount Pleasant and Southmoreland that started 2-1. Elizabeth Forward, who reached the WPIAL championship game last year, is off to a 1-2 start and really struggling offensively, which is kind of surprising. So, but once again, 4 teams here are going to make the playoffs, and who's it going to be? One of these teams that started off winless is going to bounce back and go on a run in conference play.
It's
So
not like they're 0-2 by, I mean, some of them have gotten, like Brownsville just got
yeah,
blasted, so, oh my, hey, that's why we play them. You never know, they could turn it around here.
yeah, and Brownsville's a program that's fallen on. I mean, they were a premier program back in the 80s, 90s, even the first couple of years of the 2000s, and really have just fallen on hard times. I mean, they've been bad for a while now. Haven't made the playoffs since 2001.
You're usually not that blunt when you describe a team.
They've
I mean, we'll just replay it. Really, they've been bad for a while.
they've been bad for a long time. Yeah. Hold on a second here. I'll find it for you. Pull up my spreadsheet here. All right. So
we'll take your word
so
for it.
in the decade of the 2000s, from 2010 through 2019, Brownsville was 11-84. So when I say they've been bad for a long time, like that's 1 win a year for 10 years on average. Like they've been,
look, there's teams like that everywhere. I mean, I could talk to you about those teams in District 3, as well, that, at one point were, juggernauts, and now are, my God, they're fighting to win a game, and and not by lack of trying. I mean, the effort and the community are all behind these teams, but for some reason they just can't get over the schneid. Some of it has to do with the league that they're in, but that's hard to see with Brownsville because there really doesn't look like there's any top flight competition in this interstate conference.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I will say about Brownsville is that they were a 2A school the last few years that got bumped up to 3A this cycle. So that was kind of unfortunate for them. But I was just kind of looking through their historical seasons here. The last time Brownsville won more than 3 games in a season was 2005. So, when I say they've been bad for a while, they've been bad for a while. I mean, that's 16 years that they haven't won more than 3 games in a year. So,
yeah, and like you said, in the way that the WPIAL puts the conferences together, they're only playing against teams around the majority of the games they're playing are against like classification. So it's not like they're being beaten up by the big guys because they're not playing it.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty much. Moving down to 2A, half of these, there's 4 conferences in 2A, and 2 of them are starting play this week and 2 of them will start in 2 weeks. So the Century Conference, which McGuffey won last year, and Washington has been a dominant force for a long time. Somebody was beating up on
these lower classifications.
Yeah. So you can see here that a lot of these teams had a lot of games scheduled against the Tri-County South Conference in 1A, which is a lot of the small rural programs in Fayette, Greene County, Washington County, those areas. So, but yeah, Washington got 3 wins, a good win over Clairton, good win over a really good 1A program. But Washington's 3 wins all against 1A programs. Chartiers Houston's 2 wins over 1A programs. McGuffey, who had like I said, won the conference last year, they've got 2 losses, but one loss was to Southmoreland, that's a 3A school, and 1 loss was to Stowe Rocks, who's one of the premier 2A programs. So I mean, I think McGuffey is still right in the mix, even though they're off to a 1-2 start. Conversely, you've got Waynesburg, who's also 1-2, but 2 of their losses were to 1A schools. So that was why
you've got a team who's 0-3 who is a playoff contender. That
was my preseason outlook on them because they finished 3rd in the conference last year.
Oh, and I think that only exemplifies or just emphasizes what I just talked about, is the fact that now they're going to be playing against like opponents.
Yeah,
and against those like opponents, they would be favored to win.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, so let's talk about Fraser. That I was actually kind of surprised by their start, that they, struggled to score. They, the loss to Bishop Canevin, not super surprising. Canevin's a pretty good 1A school. The loss to Brentwood, okay, Brentwood's a middle of the pack 2A school. The loss to Bentworth was a bit surprising though, because I thought Bentworth was, kind of a lower end 1A school this year. But nevertheless, now, 4 of these 7 teams are going to make the playoffs. So Fraser just has to go out and beat Charleroi, Waynesburg, and Beth Center, and they can finish 4th and make the playoffs. So yeah, I think they're still right in the mix for it, because any of these teams can just win a couple games and get in here. So it's
Yeah.
gonna be interesting to watch.
Right. And
Yeah.
like I said, making the playoffs is one thing. Actually going deep in the playoffs is a completely different story.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's why for so long, I kind of held up, like, making the WPIAL semifinals was a huge accomplishment, because when you have 16 teams that make the playoffs in a classification, like, that's winning 2 playoff games. You've got to beat at least 1, maybe 2 good teams to get there. So yeah,
Yep.
for some schools, making the playoffs is an accomplishment. But for others, like the semifinals is really, I'd say, for the most part, the equivalent of winning a lot of other districts,
Right.
because in all these classifications, the WPIAL champion goes to the state semifinals automatically. So the WPIAL championship game really is like the state quarterfinal game. And then the Midwestern Conference. So there are 8 teams here, and 5 of them will make the playoffs. Once again, with the color coding, Beaver Falls, the defending WPIAL 2A champion, should not panic. They are 0-2, but both of their losses were to very good 4A programs. So they have no reason to panic. They're a 2A school that lost 2 games to 4A programs, and were somewhat competitive in both of them. So they will be perfectly fine whenever they get into their 2A conference schedule against some of these other opponents that have been beating up on, 1A and 2A programs so far. So they have by far played the hardest, conference, or the hardest non-conference schedule. But this was one of the things I mentioned about the WPIAL doing a good job scheduling. So Beaver Falls moved down from 3A to 2A last year. And Aliquippa, they had been in a conference with them in 3A, and Aliquippa got bumped up to 4A, but they were rivals, so the WPIAL kept them on the schedule. Blackhawk was another, program in 4A that had kind of been a lower end 4A program until the last couple of years when they had made the semifinals. But nevertheless, historical rivals with Beaver Falls too. So, Beaver Falls had been a 3A program, moved down to 2A, but the WPIAL kept scheduling games against them, against higher classification and local teams there in Beaver County. So that was one of the, the scheduling things that the WPIAL did, but it makes a difference kind of looking at these non-conference records, that you had a team like, Neshannock that beat 2 1A teams in a 2A program. So
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
yep. So we'll see. But 5 of these schools are going to make the playoffs, and there are some good schools here. And there's a lot of close games that have happened here. Like, look at New Brighton. They won by 7, they lost by 7, they lost by 8. I mean, these are 3 one-score games that New Brighton was in. So they're a good competitive football team. Same with Freedom. Lose by 5, lose by 2. I mean, that's a 2-point conversion that they missed, basically. Win by 6. So Freedom, once again, a good competitive team that's been in all their games. So there's some teams here that are going to start beating each other too. That this is a conference I don't expect to be fully tiered between all of them. I expect there to be some teams that beat each other, and some tiebreakers to come into play as well as we move into the season. So moving down to 1A, all 3 1A programs will start, or all 3 1A conferences will start conference play this week. Rochester and Olsh have lived up to my expectations so far. Fort Cherry has performed very well so far as well. Union, I thought would be in the mix, so congratulations to them as well for a solid 2-1 start. And Shenango, who made the semifinals last year, we knew they were going to have to replace a couple starters, including their star running back, off to an 0-2 start. But once again, both of those losses were against 2A opponents, so not time to push the panic button just yet for Shenango. They can fully get back into things. And then you've got like a Burgettstown team that beat 2 fellow 1A opponents, but they were 2 teams from the Tri-County South, which, as we had talked about before, the Tri-County South Conference has not put a team in the WPIAL championship game since 1995. So it's been quite a while. So yeah, this conference kind of playing out as expected. I expect Shenango to kind of play their way up into the playoff mix, but 5 of these teams are going to make the playoffs. So once again, it's kind of it's a numbers game, right? You've got, 5 are going to make it, 5 out of 8. So, which 5 is it going to be? In the Eastern Conference, once again, a reason not to panic. Clairton being 0-2, but their 2 losses were both to pretty good 2A schools in Steel Valley and Washington. So they'll be perfectly fine once we get into conference play. Bishop Canavan's been really impressive so far. Springdale's been very impressive so far. So those teams will be right in the mix. And Leechburg, looking to end their playoff drought. They have not been to the postseason since the late 1980s. So they're looking to end their, I believe it's a 35-year playoff drought in Leechburg. So, for them, yes, just making the playoffs would be a tremendous accomplishment.
Well, let's keep an eye on that one. I mean,
we certainly will.
Clearly, if that team makes the playoffs, we got to get the coach on.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that's the motivating factor for Leechburg, is that if they do make the playoffs, that they'll be on the WPIAL BLITZ show.
I think so 1988 was actually their last playoff appearance. So yeah, it's been 32 years since they made the playoffs last in 1988, which is crazy that the kids in high school now weren't even born when they last made the playoffs. So Leechburg was one of those teams. I think I said on our season preview show that my bold prediction for this year was that they would make it, but there's some other good teams here. I mean, Clairton's going to play their way up. Greensburg Central Catholic's playing well right now. Bishop Canavan's playing really well. And, Jeanette's lost 3 games, got crushed in all 3 of them.
And that's just painful to look at.
It is. And I feel really bad for the kids, because the kids are doing the best they can. That, that was a school they were
in the state championship game last year.
They were in the state championship game. They had a bunch of graduations. Their star quarterback and wide receiver both transferred to Gateway. They had, a couple other kids transfer, a couple kids move out of state. So they lost their entire starting lineup and basically had to go find kids to come play this year just so they could field a team. So, the kids are trying their best, and credit to them. But you're right. It's really tough to see them down there.
Has there ever been a more precipitous fall from grace? I mean, that's hard to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, going from the state championship
game to losing 3 games, average, I don't even know what the average is. I'll leave that up to you, but 40, 82, and 55 to nothing.
Yeah.
Ooh,
the one I'll say that maybe comes close was Beaver Falls won the 3A state championship in 2016. And similar thing, they had a bunch of kids graduate. They had some kids transfer out. And then their first week of the year, their star quarterback and their starting running back got injured. And they wound up going 1-8 that year. So they went from 3A state champions to 1-8 the following year. So that's, in recent memory, the closest one I can think of. And then the final conference in 1A, the Tri-County South. Like we said, this is one, they haven't put a team in the WPIAL championship game since 1995. California is a good school, a good program. They've been kind of the dominant force there. Carmichael's is always in the mix. Yeah. West Green was a team that I had thought at the beginning of the year could contend for the conference title. We'll see how it plays out. But once again, it's kind of a wide open mix going in here. 5 of these teams are going to make the playoffs once again. So Avella was a team that made the playoffs.
Avella's got to be the biggest disappointment out there, I think.
Yeah, on the heels of a really tough defense that Avella had last year that really carried them through some games. And they're giving up some points this year, which we'll see once they get into conference play, though, how things work out. And actually, I think Avella plays Jefferson Morgan this week in a battle of 0-3 teams that have both given up a ton of points. So we'll see how that one plays out.
Yeah, my God, yeah.
Yep. But looking at our games of the week here, Cannon Mac against Mount Lebanon, 2 playoff contenders in 6A. Cannon Mac beat Mount Lebanon last year, so the Blue Devils will be out looking for revenge. 5A still playing non-conference games, but Peters Township against Penn Trafford have played a couple playoff games the last 2 years. They've gotten to know each other a little bit. And 2 schools that looking to contend for playoff spots, potentially a WPIAL title. So that'll be a good matchup between them. Armstrong and Hampton in 4A. 4A, a matchup in the Greater Allegheny Conference. Hampton started 3-0, Armstrong started 2-1. So a good game to see how those teams will play out. Good mix of styles too. Hampton runs the ball a lot and Armstrong throws it a lot. So we'll see how that one plays out. South Allegheny against Southmoreland. That game in the Interstate Conference could wind up deciding who the fourth team in the playoffs is, just because
Really?
of who else is in the playoffs. Yeah, well, you never know.
This early?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so let's go back to that, right? That you had, so Mount Pleasant 2-1, Elizabeth Forward 1-2, and South Park was, I thought South Park would be a lot better. So maybe South Park takes a step back, but Mount Pleasant, Elizabeth Forward, and South Park were all playoff teams last year. So this year, 4 teams are going to make the playoffs. If you think those 3 are in, who's the 4th one going to be? Southmoreland off to a good start. South Allegheny 0-3, but I'll say better or at least closer results than Brownsville or York have had. Like I said, looking at similar opponents, South Allegheny 12-10 lost to Ringgold versus a 40-0 loss to Ringgold.
Yeah.
So, if you start to look at it, who's that 4th
connecting the dots,
right? Exactly. So,
or just putting in the colors.
Right. I'll say it's a game with playoff implications in week 3. Beaver Falls against Laurel. At the beginning of the season, I kind of pegged them as the top contenders for the Midwestern Conference title. So as the season plays out, this game could wind up being the one that decides the conference title. And head-to-head tiebreakers are always the first tiebreaker. So getting big wins early is important. In 1A, Bishop Canevin and Springdale, good game between 2 undefeated teams. Then California against West Green, a game between 2 teams with their eyes on winning the conference title in the Tri-County South. Some good non-conference matchups this week as well. And we've had a good schedule so far. It's been an exciting season through 3 games through 2 weeks. Actually, I should say week 3 games of the week. Sorry about that. But nevertheless, it's been fun so far. And we'll see where we go from here as we get into conference play and as we, start heading towards the playoffs.
Well, now is when all the storylines start to develop once, you actually have something on the line, because technically you haven't had anything on the line up until this point, which still bugs me. That you have, that you have the district scheduling the games and that they don't really matter. I don't know. I mean, like I said, every game matters enormously for District 3. It doesn't matter every game matters so much because it's all based on power ranking. And maybe that's because teams are playing in conferences with different classifications, which is different than the WPIAL. The WPIAL is all group conference by classification. So I guess I get that, but still, it's the teams making the playoffs in other districts. It's on their total body of work, not just their conference schedule. And some, and look, I guess there's rationales for both, but it's hard for me to get my arms around the fact that the WPIAL has not yet played a meaningful game.
And I would agree with that to the point of they've not played a meaningful game as far as qualification for the playoffs.
Right.
But a lot of these games that they scheduled were historical rivalry games. So there was a lot of meaning for them,
but see, in other districts, those meaningful rivalry games mean something. I mean, in the total body of work.
Yeah.
And that, the light bulb finally came on here, obviously last year was a complete anomaly, because of the scheduling and everything like that. Now, as we've gotten in here and the light bulb is on the district is doing all the games. The preseason games really don't matter. It's only your conference schedule that determines the playoff teams. And then, so what is the PIAA then? Do they look at the complete body of work? I don't know. I guess, I still just have a hard time
Yeah.
with the fact that only a certain part of the schedule is what counts on what teams. It still comes down to, look, and the power rankings get you in and seed you. You still got to go out and win the games. You know what I'm saying? But still, every game counts. And in the WPIAL, there's a lot of exhibition games, basically.
Yeah, and the one thing they did do this cycle that was kind of a change from how they'd historically operated was historically they'd had bigger conferences, so that there were more conference games. So I mean, there were years where there was 10 teams in one conference, so your entire 9-game schedule was all conference opponents, or there was conferences of 8 teams or 9 teams, so you really only had one game that was a non-conference game. Whereas the big change this year was that because of kind of geographically how teams were separated, they said, okay, we're going to have a couple conferences where we only put 6 teams in a conference, rather than, so like, let's take 5A, for example. There's 18 teams in 5A. They could have split them into 2 conferences of 9 teams, but it would have created absolutely atrocious travel schedules for a couple of them, and you would have had schools that were basically next door to each other that would have had to been split between 2 conferences, and it wouldn't have made any sense.
Too,
so that what they did was they split them into 3 conferences of 6 teams each, which means only 5 of your 9 games are conference games. So then it's like, what do you do for the other games? So that was one of the changes this year from the past. That in the past they'd focused on larger conferences, more conference games on the schedule, whereas this time they were like more geographically focused conferences and shorten the travel time.
But all within the WPIAL, there's very few games that I saw that any of these teams were playing outside of the WPIAL.
Yeah,
and right, wrong, or indifferent, and I'm just talking about out east here. We like these games that, golly, you gotta, that are outside of your league or outside of your district, where they're playing teams, let's just say would be the equivalent for you of, District 10. But I can understand why they have to keep it within the conference, just because there's so many fewer teams west of, I-99.
Right.
So,
and that's part of it too, is that the WPIAL as a whole spans 9 counties.
yeah, right.
So there's a large geographic
area.
Yeah, and I guess actually 10 if you want to count Indiana, because Indiana school district is part of the WPIAL. So
that's a big area. District 3, I think we've got Dauphin, and I don't know, like 6 counties. York, Adams, Dauphin, Lancaster, Lebanon, Berks, and I think there's parts of a couple others, but it's not geographically as large as the WPIAL. No
right. And I fully recognize this WPIAL is the largest district in the state with numbers wise. I mean, we've got 122 schools. So and I think that's one of the things with the WPIAL wanting to make sure that every team has a game every week, that they scheduled they've
got the ability to do that just because of the membership.
Right. Well, actually, I guess it's down to 121 now since Uniontown's playing independent. So there is one school each week, I guess, that has an open date that could schedule someone else. So, but one school in the entire 10 county region.
Well, look, we have to have our first take kind of, back and forth here. We can't just always, agree here. It's it's very interesting. All right, my man. What's on the agenda for this week?
So I'm gonna try and go visit another game. We'll see. I went to Stowe Rocks last week, and a couple of years ago, my family and I kind of came up with this crazy idea that I wanted to visit every stadium in the WPIAL. So we'll see where we go. That Laurel Beaver Falls game is really appealing to me in 2A. That could potentially decide the conference title. So maybe we'll drive up to Newcastle. It's about an hour away, and go see Laurel play. But I like going to see these small schools because it's fun to see these schools that are
They
having
seem to be much
historically
more
good seasons.
traditional
Yeah.
than the larger schools, but
Yeah. And the large schools that are good, I feel like I can go see them anytime. Like I can go to Thomas Jefferson any year and know they'll be a good team. I can go to Gateway any year and know they'll be a good team. But some of the smaller schools, a couple years ago, Southmoreland made the playoffs for the first time in 40 years. So we went out there to see them play. So we're like, this is a historically good season. Let's go see them.
right.
So,
Good.
that was a lot of fun out at Russ Grimm Field in Alverton, Pennsylvania there. So but I think we'll gonna try and take the family to a game this week, and a lot of good games on the slate, and we'll see where conference play takes us. I'll keep the WPIAL standings page at steelcityblitz.com updated, and thanks to everyone who watches the show, and we'll keep doing this and be back next week.
Yeah, I think not I think I know. I mean, I'll be broadcasting the Governor Mifflin Cedar Crest game Friday. Not sure if I'm gonna get out on Saturday this week. I know last Saturday I got to see LaSalle and Imhotep, which was a good game. And I want to go out and see obviously good games and everything like that. So we might just stick with one this week, but we've actually got 2 games on SSPN. We're actually also doing Pope John Paul II and Berks Catholic. So 2 actually they were in the top 10 of Penn Live last week, 4A. So we'll be doing that game too. So we try and keep up. I got to try and get out there and see if I can do a game, this year. We got to figure out, like, take a look at something. See if we can set up something. I'm looking for a game October the 8th. So see what we can set up maybe. And, I can come out and maybe you can do the color on the broadcast and, we come out and do a game out there somewhere,
Yeah, could be fun. I'll take a look at the schedule.
Take a look. I mean, October 8th, I've got nothing out here. So maybe we come out and do a WPIAL game, you and I on October 8th. How about that?
Gateway at Penn Trafford is the premier game that week.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, obviously we've got to be able to let the schools broadcast it too. So
I'm just saying there, that's 2 of the top 5A schools squaring off. Yeah, that's right. Well, the premier game that week.
Hey, look, you got a little time, but not a lot. So.
Just
all right, my man. Hey, listen, it's been a blast as always, and hopefully everybody else has liked it. Too. That we've had it here. So listen, thanks for tuning in on the WPIAL Blitz Show. I'm Bruce Badgley for my buddy Ian. Hey, we'll see you guys next week. And I can't get this thing turned off, I don't think. So I'm just going to have to end it.
Okay. Sounds good.
We'll see you later.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.